Colossal Swords are for the homies that only feel safe when they've got the biggest sword possible in their hands. There are 11 Colossal Swords in Elden Ring, and today we're going to go through all of them, rank them from worst to best, and talk a little about them. Let's go. Let me know in the comments down below if you'd like me to do the Great Swords or the Curved Swords next. So let's get into the overview. So Colossal Swords, not to be confused with Colossal Weapons, are very heavy with very slow attack animations. To make up for this, they have a very long reach and an insane high amount of damage output. Generally, Colossal Swords are wielded in strength builds. There's only really one that's kind of like a dex build variant, but for the most part, if you're going to be using Colossal Swords, you're going to be in some sort of strength and endurance build, just because of how heavy they are and also because of the really high strength requirements for a lot of these weapons. In patch 1.08, the speed of crouching and rolling attacks was slightly increased as well for all of the Colossal Swords. This is actually a huge buff. It's now their fastest attack if you crouch attack or roll attack, so well worth like mixing that into your attacks if you're using these kind of weapons. So for some general build stuff, if you're going to use a single Colossal Sword, you're probably going to be using it two-handed, because really you're not going to use any kind of shield with any of these or like staff in some sort of spellblade build. Just because of how slow their attack animations are, you're really going to be two-handing it, leaning into that like strength benefit you get from two-handing a weapon and doing it in that way. Or you could dual wield two of these and like have one in each hand with some sort of a jump attack build, or even using the special benefits of the Starscourge sword where you two-hand it but you've only got one of them, if you know what I mean. So there really isn't a huge amount of flexibility with these because of how, I guess, like high their requirements are and how very specific their builds are. There is some flexibility, but we'll get into them now. We'll start with the worst and we'll do the best. And the worst, in my opinion, is the Troll Knight sword. Now, this is the worst for a couple of reasons. For the first thing, its physical damage is relatively low. It's the third physical damage overall. It also has very low magic damage. It's got more physical damage than the Royal Greatsword, but lower magic damage. It's got the third longest reach, which is a positive. It's relatively light. It's not the lightest of the Colossal Swords, weighing in at 18, which is pretty good. It's got that unique like R2 like heavy attack poke animation that some of these great swords do have, which all, I mean, generally sounds positive. But the downside is you can't change the Ash of War, and the Ash of War is Troll's Roar, which isn't very good in general. It's, you know, it does like a little bit of a shockwave, which isn't too bad. You can follow it up with a slam attack. So it's not too bad, but because of its low overall physical and extremely low magic damage, and then an Ash of War that you can't change, and when you do max this weapon out, it only finishes with C strength and C dex scaling and D int scaling, which isn't very high as a whole. So you've got low damage output and attack rating across the board, and you can't change the Ash of War into something better, and it's also just doesn't really have a lot of flexibility. And when you're in a weapon category like this, where the weapons don't have a whole lot of flexibility in general, when you're stuck with an Ash of War and in a kind of an int build that isn't really int focused, it doesn't work out too well. It's not the worst weapon like ever in Elden Ring, but it's the worst of the Colossal Swords in my opinion. Let's move on to the Watchdog's Greatsword. This bad boy is a relatively heavy greatsword. It's the second heaviest, weighing in at 22. It does have higher stat requirements, having 30 strength and 10 dex in order to wield it. When you do max this out, it finishes at strength B and dex E, so not too bad. It does have worse dex scaling than the Greatsword and less physical damage as a whole than the Greatsword itself. And it does come with Stamp Upward Cut, which is exactly the same as the Greatsword that it comes with. This can be changed, same as on the Greatsword. And when you look at both of these weapons, if you max out the Watchdog's Greatsword and then make it a heavy variant, it does finish with S strength scaling, whereas the Greatsword only has A. So that's like the only thing it has going for it. But even still, its damage is lower than the actual Greatsword itself. So there is so much overlap with this weapon to just the actual Greatsword itself, which makes this weapon really not worth it in a lot of regards, because it's just got worse stats across the board, and its only redeeming quality is that it's slightly lighter than the actual Greatsword. That's really it. Ruin's Greatsword is next. This is the heaviest of the Colossal Swords, tied with the Greatsword. It's the second longest of the Colossal Swords. It has a huge strength required in order to wield. You need 50 strength and 16 intelligence. It does have the same physical damage as the Troll's Knight Sword, but much lower magic damage. It does finish with S strength scaling, which is, you know, pretty good. It's got something good going for it, and it does come with the Wave of Destruction Ash of War that you can't actually change. And this is a pretty solid Ash of War, so I don't know why you would want to change it. You essentially lift up the Greatsword, slam it back down, and do a great like graviton like wave I was going to say Graviton Surge there. I've been playing way too much Overwatch. Anyway, so this weapon is relatively okay, and it's got some really good things going for it. Its charged strong attacks do also deal a slight like gravity magic damage burst as well. Lots of interesting things happening with it, but its overall low physical damage and super low magic damage don't really stand out from the crowd. It is a very unique weapon, and you can absolutely use this in a single build where you would have like one of these and two-hand it in something like that into the magic damage. Something definitely is there you could build with. Troll's Golden Sword is next. This is a pretty light Colossal Sword. It's not the lightest, but it is pretty light at 19. It's got that unique poke heavy attack that some of these do have. It has the third highest physical damage of all of the Colossal Swords. It does finish with C strength and D dex scaling. The Ash of War Troll's War, which we did talk about earlier, so we don't need to cover it again, can be changed on this weapon, which essentially just makes it a better version of the Troll's Night Sword in like every way, because it's more flexible in the way that you can change it. It is an okay Colossal Sword with high physical damage, and you can change the Ash of War, so it is essentially better than the Troll's Night Sword. It's just not the best in terms of these kind of standard generic Colossal Swords like the Greatsword and some of these other ones, if you know what I mean. Moving on to the Grafted Blade Greatsword. This bad boy has an average rate. It has that unique heavy attack that we just spoke about as well. It's got the second highest physical damage just behind the Greatsword. It's got a very high strength requirement, requiring 40 strength in order to wield. The Ash of War Oath of Vengeance is unique and cannot be changed. What this does is it will temporarily raise all of your attributes for like 30 seconds, as well as your poise. It's a relatively okay Ash of War, except you can't change it, which, you know, gives it some uniqueness to it, but they're just better options in terms of Ash of Wars, as well as like in terms of Colossal Swords as well. You could use this in your second hand in some sort of dual wielding build, basically using it as like a buff option, so you can like two-hand this, use the Oath of Vengeance to get that buff, and then just switch back to like two-handing. There's options there that you could do, but I would choose a different option, like the Royal Greatsword. The Royal Greatsword does have the lowest physical damage of all of the Greatswords, but it is compensated by its very high magic damage compared to the rest of these. Now, it does have an Ash of War Wolf's Assault that you also cannot change, but it does have a strong amount of poise while you are casting it. It's got a really cool animation effect to it, where you like zoom around in the air, you slam it into the ground, and then there's a little like cold explosion. Really quite a solid weapon in terms of its overall scaling, and that you could make some sort of int strength build with this. Got decent attack rating as a whole. Absolutely a great option, and I have seen a lot of these bad boys floating around the Colosseum since it came out. Moving on to the Zweihander. The Zweihander? I don't know if I'm saying that right. Along with the Troll's Night Sword, this has that unique R2 poke attack. It is the lightest of all of the Colossal Swords. It is also the second shortest, which is probably the trade-off there, and it does scale better with dexterity than strength. This is what like the only one of these that does. So when you max this out, it finishes with C dex scaling. Now, because of its lightweight, and you can get this super early in the game in the Weeping Peninsula, and it comes with an Ash of War stamp upward cut that can be changed. There's a lot of value in this weapon, and you could make some sort of dex build dual wielding with these because of their lightweight. And also, if you're looking to wield Colossal Swords like super early in the game, this is probably the one that you're going to use because of that reason, that you can get it very early in the game. It does have a lightweight, so you probably won't be heavy rolling, but it's very viable for those regards, and it does have such a low strength and dex requirement. You can change the Ash of War, lots of flexibility into this weapon, and just like does average physical damage across the board. Absolutely a solid option. Moving on to the Greatsword itself. Now, can someone in the comments tell me why most of these weapons are called something Greatsword? Like, this is literally just called a Greatsword. There's the Royal Greatsword, the Grafted Blade Greatsword, Greatsword. Except this category of weapon is called the Colossal Swords, and there is an entire separate category of weapons just called Greatswords. That doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, let's move on. The Greatsword itself is a Colossal Sword. Now, this is the heaviest of the Greatswords. It is tied with the Ruin's Greatsword. It does have a high stat requirement, requiring 31 strength and 12 dex. It scales better with strength, finishing with B and dex with D. So most of these weapons will finish with like strength B and dex E, whereas the Greatsword finishes with dex D. So there's a bit more flexibility there in terms of getting some value out of that little bit of dex that you do have. It does have the highest base physical damage of all of the Colossal Swords, and this is the best of the standard Colossal Swords when we're not talking about unique weapons. This one is so flexible because of you can change that Ash of War, and you can build this into anything. You could two-hand this in some like really strength-focused build. You can dual wield it because it does like weigh a absolute ton, but it is possible to dual wield it and still be able to medium roll and make some sort of a build in that way, and then use the ability to change the Ash of War into something that's a little bit more valuable to you, or even change it into like an intelligence build or a faith build, or, you know, lightning, because you can change the Ash of War into those effects and really benefit from that heavy ability with this weapon. Lots of value in that itself. itself. Moving on, we have 3 final weapons on this list, and these come in like almost at the same point, and I really struggled with what order to put these in, and I'm honestly not even sure I'm happy with it now, so you can let me know in the comments how wrong I am. We'll start with the Godslayers Greatsword. This is the second lightest of the Greatswords. It also has the second lowest physical damage, but it also does fire damage, which is unique compared to all the other Colossal Swords on this list. It's also the third shortest of the Colossal Swords. So the trade-off really for this weapon, when we talk about the lowest physical damage, the third shortest, being pretty light, is that it does attack faster than the other Colossal Swords, but it deals less overall damage. When you max this bad boy out, finishes with D Strength Scaling, B Dex, and C Faith, and it's got that unique, the Queen's Black Flame Ash of War on it that will do like the Black Flame's damage over time effect. It does have a second input attack as well. It's a really solid weapon, and I really, really like this Colossal Sword. It's, got that unique like Dex and Faith scaling that you can kind of do something with. It's lightweight, got faster attacks, which is like one of the big issues with the Colossal Swords. It is a great weapon. Moving on to the Starscourge Greatsword. Now, this is one of the probably most unique weapons in the game. So this has middle of the pack kind of physical damage and the second highest magic damage of the 4 Colossal Swords with magic damage. It also has the longest reach. It deals 30% more damage to gravity type enemies as well. And when you max this out, it finishes with B Strength, D Dex, and D Intelligence scaling. It does require a fair amount of strength in order to use. So you're really going to be using this in a strength and intelligence build. Now, what's unique about this weapon is that you can one-hand it, but you really will never do that, because when you two-hand this weapon, you actually pull out the second of the Starscourge Greatsword and wield it just like Radahn does, and you've got like the 2 in your hands. This gives it some unique attack animations and move sets because of that, and your normal like power stancing attack that you would use is still actually a block, and then you attack like normally with your light and heavy attacks, but you attack with both of them. I really like this weapon, and you can definitely do something with just the actual move sets and using it with like jump attacks and different things, and it does do solid magic and physical damage, but even the Ash of War Starcaller Cry is fantastic in terms of its damage, its AoE potential that it can do when you slam them into the ground and deal like that follow-up attack. Lots of value in this weapon, absolutely well worth using, but it's not the best. And the best, I think, is Malikeths Black Blade. Malikeths Black Blade is the second heaviest, tied with the Watch Dogs Greatsword. It has middle of the pack physical damage again, but it also does holy damage, and when you max this out, it does finish with B Strength, D Dex, and B Faith scaling. So very similar to the Starscourge Greatsword in terms of, its overall what it is, physical damage, like middle of the pack, except Starscourge does magic and this does holy. It does finish with B Strength and B Faith, whereas Starscourge finishes with B Strength and D Intelligence. That's probably the main difference, right? Now, there is obviously a different Ash of War. Here it is Destined Death, which will do some sort of like damage over time effect. It will also lower the target's maximum HP, which is really valuable in PvP, not so much in like normal play. You're not really ever going to use that in some regard. Now, it's an AoE attack, kind of like Starscourge's effect, but because you've only got one of these, and if you dual wield, you could do something different with this, something in your offhand, or really just use it in like a two-handed kind of setup. I really struggled with which one of these to put as the top, whether it's Starscourge or Malikeths, or even the Godslayer. I am a fan of the Godslayer's weapon, but I really think this is the option because of its like more flexibility that you can do with this weapon, plus it's like slightly better scaling, and even though holy damage isn't great in the end game, I still feel like this is the best option, but do let me know in the comments how wrong I am. Go and check out my Reapers ranked video. There's plenty of these ranked videos on the channel. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Noz, and have a great day.